Yeah, so this episode, these two episodes on Longshanks, deal with them more thematically, chronologically as well. But last time we talked about nearly everything of importance apart from the Scottish question. So in this one, I want to do a whole episode on it. And I'll be quoting mainly from Mark Morris's book on Edward I, because he goes into lots and lots of detail about the campaigns, many years worth of campaigns in Scotland, and how things just got progressively worse. So I guess we could just jump straight in.
Yeah, I think it might be worth contextualising it. I mean, England doesn't actually invade Scotland that much before this point, does it?
No, that's one of the big elements, is that for quite a few decades before this, there'd been almost complete peace with the Scots. In fact, just before we get into it, can I do a little segment on Eleanor of Castile?
Sure.
Edward's first wife, because I didn't talk about that last time, and I think it is one of the other elements that need to get mentioned.
Yeah, of course.
Along with Edward's treatment of the Jewish community, which we'll deal with at the end. So his first wife, Eleanor of Castile, Edward was completely faithful to her, apparently. She got pregnant like 14 times or something, and there's no stories of him being sort of a philanderer, a womanizer in any real way. He seemed to genuinely love her. He seemed to actually ask her about policy. He didn't give her a place in government or anything, but he would actually ask her and his mother, who lived to be extremely ancient, he would ask them their opinion on policy and things. So he was quite close to her, very, very close to her. And in fact, she even would help in diplomatic ways. She could act as a diplomat. So when she died in 1290 of just a natural causes, natural illness, some people think it might have been a type of malaria she might have contracted in France at some point. But anyway, she was only 49 and he was 51 at the time. They'd been married for 36 years. So, you know...
But it's heartbroken.
Yeah, right, he really was. When people are married for that long and they're that close, you know, you become almost like a symbiotic organism.
Well, you can't really imagine your life without them.
Right. So when she died sort of out of the blue, she was ill for a few weeks, but no more than that. And then she pops her clogs and he was devastated. And one of the important things or interesting things, well-known things, is that she died up near Lincoln, was it? And when they processed her body down to London, at every stop where she stayed, they built a cross. And they're called the Eleanor crosses.
Yeah, I did know about this, actually.
They actually built 3 tombs for her. Obviously, she was only interred in one. But 12 crosses at the different stages. And the last one, or penultimate one, was at Charing Cross. And it's still there to this day.
Really?
Incredibly, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's just sort of outside Embankment Station. If you walk up the hill from Embankment, you get out the front of Charing Cross Station.
I've been there numerous times. And
it's right next to McDonald's.
I had no idea how it was named or what was there. I'm going to have to look for that next time I'm there.
Yeah, it's original 13th century, which is very, very, very rare. There's just taxis going around it.
Yeah.
People eating their McDonald's and stubbing out their cigarettes on it and stuff. But anyway, that is there.
Yeah. That's very romantic, though, isn't it? You know, he's obviously got a beautiful Spanish wife, falls in love with her, spends 36 years with her, and then is heartbroken when she dies. And then goes on a sort of romantic crusade to memorialise her across the country. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and he does get remarried a few years later to a much younger woman. Is it Margaret of France? In this story, all the women are either of any note are either called Eleanor or Margaret. All of them.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one exception. Florence of Holland. There's a Florence of Holland at one point, but anyway, they're nearly all called Margaret. Yeah. Especially in Scotland. So that's the story of Edward I's mourning over his wife. So let's get into the Scottish thing. Yeah, where I said there had been peace for ages, since really Henry II onwards. So here's the sort of the absolute key pivotal thing, is that the English crown considered themselves overlords, over kings of any Scottish king.
Yeah.
The Scottish king considered himself completely independent, truly independent.
And this goes back as far as Athelstan.
Right. Well, yeah, the Scots even sort of refused to accept the authority of Rome during ancient times.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I respect that.
the Romans had battles up in Scotland,
Yep.
Grampian and stuff. So anyway, you know, Hadrian obviously only got as far as, well, not even quite as far as the Forths. And in the age of the Antonines a bit later, never completely subdued all the Highlands or anything. So anyway, what had happened in the few decades before the 1290s, that they'd had a King David I, and then Alexander, King Alexander III of Scotland. And Alexander III seems to have been quite a good king insofar as he sort of kept peace, and he united Scotland in various ways, because Scotland was a bit of a patchwork. The people in the south, in the lowlands, were much more Anglo-Norman or English in various ways. People in the west, on the Western Isles, were, as you can imagine, more Celtic or looked towards Ireland. People on the east sort of were more Nordic, looked towards Scandinavia, Viking.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of different people. I was reading something else the other day, and it was saying that Wales is a very sort of homogenous and united thing. They're like ancient Britons, but Scotland's not like that. The people of the Highlands don't necessarily like or trust the people of the lowlands, and it was the case even in the 13th century. So anyway, these reigns of David and Alexander were so sort of peaceful, and the kings of England had their hands full in all sorts of other ways, that it never came to a head. Both sides were happy to just let the issue, neither side will raise the issue of the English crown being the superior crown. They just both just sort of let it slide. It was in their interests.
Yeah.
But this comes up now. And you could probably imagine that Longshanks is not of the mind to let the Scots necessarily be true sovereigns completely independently in their own right.
So what provokes the issue?
Okay, so King Alexander III of Scotland, he didn't have any uncles or brothers or children, and even his wife had died, and he got remarried to apparently a young, beautiful woman. And one evening, trying to get back to her, maybe he was drunk, he got separated from his entourage and rode his horse off a cliff.
I don't mean to laugh, but it's funny.
Yeah.
Just okay, yep.
Yeah, and died.
So that's not good for the lineage of the Scottish crown.
So for Scotland, they were like, oh, we'd sort of expected, sort of hoped for him to, because he was in his 40s. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old. They'd expect him to live for a few decades yet and sort it out, and with his new wife, sire a child and things. Well, it turns out she was pregnant.
Oh.
So everyone was like, the Scots put a regency council in place of 6 guardians, they called them, 6 guardians, and we'll wait for this baby to be born. But it was a stillbirth.
Oh.
So everyone was like, oh shit, crap.
Yeah.
Right? So Scots started looking through all the lineages of the families, and they had to go back a couple of hundred years to try and sort things out, and it looked like it was going to be really messy and difficult. But then they used the age-old trick. Well, if we don't use very, very strict primogeniture, if we go through women, the women's line, well, we've got a princess right now. So Alexander's sister, Margaret, had married the King of Norway and had a daughter, Margaret. So she's called the Maid of Norway. And she's only like 3 when Alexander dies. She's like 3 years old, 3 or 4, small child. And so she's the Maid of Norway. So when his actual son was stillborn, and when it looked like there wasn't any immediate cousins or branches, they were like, well, there is the Maid of Norway, we could do that. And now Edward Longshanks, he's got a son who becomes Edward II. He's always called Edward of Carmarthen in this. So I'll just call him the Prince of Wales or Edward II or something. He's like 2 years old at the time. So the thinking is maybe, and the Scots aren't particularly happy with this, but they understand it's probably their best shot. What if
they get married?
They get married, because you can marry little kids.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. We'll get them married, and we'll have a union of the crowns. And when Edward's old enough to become king, he'll be king of England and Scotland. Bish, bash, bosh. Everyone's a winner, right?
Just to be clear, marriage is a very political act in the royal politics 700, 800 years ago.
They were still too young to be legally married. Like, I think you have to be like 7 or 8 or 9 or something.
Betrothed.
Right, and that's good enough. That is a political union, a political thing. As I say, the Scots aren't particularly happy with it, but they're not so unhappy with it that they won't go along with it, or they won't raise rebellion to prevent it.
Could be worse.
Yeah, it's sort of the best shot they've got at this point.
I mean, there is a line of legitimacy there.
Right,
like,
there's something.
She is related to the dead king, and marrying the king's son, he's not a nobody. Like, he's going to be the king of England. This is not like a humiliation or something. You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's about the best they could hope for. So they go to do that, and everyone's looking forward to it, and got sort of great levels of enthusiasm for it. We could have united the crowns hundreds of years before we did. It could have avoided centuries of misery and bloodshed. But as the maid is coming over, by the time she gets to the Orkney Islands, she's dead. Natural causes.
Yeah, Middle Ages.
Yeah,
this happens.
So when she dies, literally everyone's like, oh, "What? Really? Okay, we're a bit screwed now."
Yeah.
Because what it meant, and everyone knew it's what it meant, is that there'll now be a lot of the Scottish warlords or the Scottish magnates, the powerful men of Scotland, are going to dispute it. And even the Crown of England might dispute it. So it is just completely up for grabs. Now, the main two contenders, in the end, there were like 13 claimants. But only 2 or 3, but really 2, were serious. John Balliol and Robert de Bruce, or Robert Bruce. Now, in the film Braveheart, you see the Bruce, right?
Briefly.
But now the one you see in Braveheart, that's the grandson of this Bruce.
Oh, is it? Right.
So there's 3 Bruces in this story.
And they're all called Robert.
Yeah. And
I hate medieval naming conventions.
And
what's Edward's son called? Edward. What's Robert's son called? Robert.
What does Edward II name his son? Edward.
Yeah.
Got 3 Edwards in a row.
It's worse than Carthage.
So the first Robert the Bruce, the grandfather, is sort of the main one for most of our story.
Right.
The middle one is sort of ineffectual. He has a part to play, but it's minimal. But the grandson is sort of the main, most famous Robert the Bruce. Again, the one you see in the film Braveheart. But his story is right at the end of this episode of Epochs. And if and when we do Edward II, he's got a big role to play, really, in that story. He's the one who saw, it's an apocryphal story, but saw the spider weaving. And so, okay, that's the grandson. So we're a few years off from him. So, Balliol and Bruce, Robert the Bruce, they seem to have been fairly evenly matched in terms of how much authority and political sway they could, and money they could sort of bring to the contest. So it wasn't clear, it really wasn't clear which one should really win. Both of their claims are fairly similar. And so at one point it looks like, early on in the story, it looks like Balliol just gets it locked down. It looks like Edward's probably going to lean towards Balliol, but then Robert Bruce gives his pledges fealty completely to Edward. He says, if I am king, I will absolutely bend the knee. The whole question of who's the over-king, well, there'll be no question of that. You will be my suzerain lord, and as King of Scotland, I shall bend the knee to you.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.